Right now, a quiet shift is happening in global infrastructure. China's giant Belt and Road Initiative used to be about building everything, everywhere, all at once. Ports, railways, highways, power plants, often announced in big waves of deals. Now, more than 10 years later, the money is moving differently. There are fewer projects, but they are bigger, more strategic, and designed to be smarter. Less coal, more green energy, and digital networks, and much tougher questions about who really wins. So is this new phase what many call Belt and Road 2.0, a smarter, more sustainable version of China's global rise, or just the same high-stakes game with better branding? By the end of this video, you will see how this new wave of Chinese megaprojects could redraw Asia's energy map, rewire digital trade routes, and change who depends on whom for power, both electric and political. To understand where Belt and Road is going, you need to know where it came from. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 as a massive plan to connect Asia, Europe, Africa, and beyond with new infrastructure and trade routes. The idea was simple to describe, but huge in scale. Build a web of ports, railways, highways, pipelines, and power lines that link distant regions back to China's factories and markets. Over its first decade, Belt and Road activity reached well over $1 trillion across more than 150 countries. There were rail links across Central Asia, ports from Sri Lanka to Greece, and energy plants from Pakistan to Zambia. Supporters say it filled a gap. Western lenders and institutions had often been slow or cautious. Belt and Road moved fast, offering roads where there were only dirt tracks, power plants where rolling blackouts were normal, and new ports that plugged forgotten regions into global trade. Critics see a different picture. They point to rising debts owed to Chinese lenders, strategic ports under long leases, and projects that seem to make more political sense than economic sense. In their view, some countries traded short-term infrastructure gains for long-term financial and strategic dependence. By the early 2020s, the big question was blunt. Had Belt and Road grown too big, too messy, and too risky to continue in the same way? For a few years after 2013, Chinese overseas lending surged. By around 2016, new state-backed loans for overseas infrastructure peaked at more than $50 billion a year, turning China into the world's largest official bilateral creditor for many developing countries. Then the problems started to surface. Some headline projects ran over budget, stalled, or underperformed. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port became a global symbol of risk when the government, struggling with debt, granted a Chinese company a 99-year lease on the port in 2017. In other countries, local protests grew over environmental damage, land seizures, or lack of transparency. Then came the pandemic, followed by inflation and rising interest rates around the world. Borrowing costs spiked just as economies slowed. Many Belt and Road partner countries suddenly found it much harder to service their debts. At the same time, China's own economy was cooling, and Beijing had to spend more effort renegotiating old loans instead of approving new ones. Researchers tracking Chinese lending noticed a sharp shift. By 2022 and 2023, developing countries were paying more money back to China each year than they were receiving in new loans. Net lending flows turned negative. In simple terms, the Belt and Road Bank was no longer mainly expanding, it was trying to stabilize and prevent defaults. If Beijing wanted its flagship initiative to survive and still shape the global system, it needed an update. That is where the idea of a second stage, Belt and Road 2.0, comes in. In this new phase, Chinese leaders began talking about high-quality Belt and Road cooperation. At the third Belt and Road Forum in Beijing in October 2023, China's president laid out a new emphasis: greener projects, cleaner governance, more digital infrastructure, tighter risk control, and more focus on livelihood projects that people can see and feel in their daily lives. Fresh financing windows worth tens of billions of dollars were announced, but the message was clear. Quantity was no longer the main bragging point. Quality and sustainability were the new key words. So what does that actually look like on the ground? First, there is more selectivity. Chinese banks and companies are now more cautious about where they lend, especially for big, long-term projects that can easily run into political controversy. Coal plants and trophy ports have a harder time getting approved. Governments that already carry heavy debt loads are under more scrutiny. Second, there is a visible shift toward green and low-carbon energy. Beijing has pledged to stop building new overseas coal power plants, and the share of Belt and Road energy investment going into solar, wind, and hydropower has steadily increased. Instead of locking countries into fossil fuel infrastructure for decades, the new pitch is to help them leapfrog into cleaner power, often using Chinese-made panels, turbines, and batteries. Third, digital infrastructure has moved to center stage. Under the banner of the Digital Silk Road, Belt and Road now includes fiber optic cables, 5G networks, data centers, satellite services, and smart city platforms. This is not about moving only containers and oil. It is about moving information, payments, and cloud services through pipelines that Chinese companies help build and sometimes operate. Finally, there is more integration. Instead of scattered one-off projects, there is greater focus on corridors and clusters, rail lines that link ports to inland industrial zones, power plants that tie into regional grids, and logistics hubs designed to plug multiple routes together. The idea is that each project should support a larger system. To see how this shift plays out, let's zoom into one of the most famous Belt and Road projects, Indonesia's Jakarta to Bandung high-speed railway. This 142-kilometer bullet train connects Indonesia's capital with the city of Bandung. When it opened for full service in late 2023, it became the first operational high-speed rail line in Southeast Asia. On paper, it is a classic Belt and Road project, a big-ticket, prestige rail line jointly developed by Indonesian and Chinese state-owned firms. Roughly three-quarters of the financing came from loans by the China Development Bank, with the rest from equity contributions. But the journey to opening day was anything but smooth. Costs climbed from about $6 billion to more than $7 billion. Land acquisition was slow and contentious. The pandemic disrupted construction. Critics questioned whether the line would attract enough passengers and freight to justify the expense. By 2025, Indonesian officials were openly talking about the need to restructure the project's debt with China in order to protect the national budget, even as the train gained popularity among travelers. Why does this matter for the story of Belt and Road 2.0? Because inside Beijing, projects like this serve as hard lessons. High-speed rail brings prestige and headlines, but if the numbers do not add up, everyone faces years of renegotiation, political criticism, and financial risk. The result is a more cautious approach to megaprojects that look impressive but may not deliver steady cash flows. The new logic is simple. If you are going to take on big risk, it should be for a project that anchors a whole region, not just a single line. A railway that links ports, cities, and industrial parks. A power line that connects multiple countries. A data cable that ties entire digital markets together. That brings us to the two big engines of Belt and Road 2.0, the Digital Silk Road and the Green Energy Web. If the first phase of Belt and Road was defined by concrete and steel, the new phase is increasingly defined by circuits and solar panels. Under the Digital Silk Road, Chinese firms have helped build or upgrade fiber networks, undersea cables, 5G systems, and data centers from Southeast Asia to the Middle East and Africa. These projects are less visible than a giant bridge or port, but they quietly reshape who carries global data, whose cloud services businesses rely on, and whose digital payment systems people tap into on their phones. At the same time, green energy has moved from a side note to a headline act. Studies of China's overseas energy portfolio show renewable projects gaining a larger share, while deals for new coal plants fall away. In parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America, Chinese companies are involved in some of the world's largest solar parks and wind farms, often tied into new transmission lines and storage systems. Put these trends together, and you start to see a new kind of megaproject, Not just a single dam or power station, but a whole electricity ecosystem, solar and wind farms, big battery facilities, upgraded grids, and maybe even new charging networks for electric vehicles. For partner countries, this can accelerate the shift away from oil and gas. For China, it creates long-term demand for its green tech industries. So who comes out ahead in this fewer, bigger, smarter game? For China, concentrating resources on strategic projects means it can better align overseas infrastructure with its long-term goals. That includes securing supply chains for key minerals, exporting advanced manufacturing and green technologies, and spreading its digital platforms and standards. For partner countries with strong planning capacity and negotiating skill, Belt and Road 2.0 can deliver better designed projects, more reliable green power, and modern digital infrastructure that might otherwise be out of reach. But there are risks and trade-offs. Countries with higher political risk or weaker institutions may see less interest from Chinese lenders. Others may find that newer projects come with stricter conditions, stronger demands for commercial returns, and less tolerance for cost overruns or delays. There is also the broader rivalry. The United States, European Union, Japan, and others have launched their own infrastructure financing efforts, presenting themselves as more transparent or more sustainable alternatives. Initiatives like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment and Global Gateway are meant to compete with or complement Belt and Road, depending on who you ask. In reality, many governments in Asia, Africa, and Latin America will try to work with everyone. Chinese money for one project, Western or multilateral money for another, maybe Gulf state funds for a third. The challenge is to manage this mix without falling into a debt trap or over-dependence on any single partner or technology stack. So what should you watch for in the coming years? First, keep an eye on debt restructurings and bailouts. If more countries renegotiate major Belt and Road loans, Beijing will likely become even more selective, focusing on projects that have clear economic returns and stable political backing. Second, watch the scale and type of green energy projects. The more large-scale solar, wind, hydro, and battery investments China backs along Belt and Road routes, the more the region's energy map will tilt toward electrification and renewables, with Chinese equipment and standards deeply embedded. Third, pay attention to digital infrastructure and data rules. Undersea cables and data centers are just the hardware. The real influence lies in who sets the rules for data storage, cross-border flows, cybersecurity, and digital payments. Those choices will determine whether the digital Silk Road feels like a shared opportunity or a point of vulnerability. Belt and Road 2.0 is not a brand new program. It is the same global initiative, reshaped by a tougher world, slower growth, climate pressure, and sharper great power competition have forced it to evolve. The real question is no longer just whether Belt and Road is good or bad. It is something deeper. In a future built on electrified transport, digital trade, and low-carbon energy, who gets to design the pipes, cables, and code that everything runs on? Because whoever designs those systems does more than build the map. They help write the rules that everyone else has to follow.